She's been in a coma for 3 months, my daughter-in-law said, her voice steady. So she won't know if you're there or not. That was the moment I should have trusted the chill that ran down my spine. My name is Margaret Collins, I'm 72 years old, and 5 years ago I buried my husband of 48 years. Since then, I've tried to be useful whenever my son Daniel needed me, even when his calls became less frequent and his visits shorter. So when he and Emily showed up at my small ranch-style home on a Thursday afternoon asking if I could stay at her mother's house for a few days while they handled some urgent business out of state, I didn't hesitate. They told me Patricia Whitmore had slipped into a coma after a stroke, that she required only basic supervision because a nurse came by in the mornings, and that they just needed someone in the house at night so she wouldn't be alone. It sounded simple, almost noble, and I told myself this was what family did. The Whitmore house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac about 20 minutes from mine, a large brick home with tall windows and a manicured lawn that looked almost too perfect for a place shadowed by illness. When we walked inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and disinfectant. Patricia lay in a hospital bed set up in the living room near the bay window, her silver hair brushed neatly back, her hands resting on top of a cream-colored blanket. Machines stood nearby, but none of them made more than a soft humming sound. No dramatic beeping. No flashing alarms. Just stillness. Emily gave me a quick tour, pointing out medication schedules written in tidy handwriting on the kitchen counter, and a binder labeled care instructions. Daniel avoided my eyes, busying himself with adjusting the thermostat and checking his phone. Before they left, Emily paused in the doorway of the living room and said, "Just don't move anything around. Mom doesn't respond to voices, so there's no need to talk to her." It was such a strange thing to emphasize that I felt a small knot tighten in my stomach. The front door closed behind them with a hollow thud, and I stood there listening to the echo fade through the hallway. The house felt too quiet for a place holding 3 generations of secrets. I walked over to Patricia's bedside and studied her face. I had met her only a handful of times at holidays. She had always been sharp, opinionated, impeccably dressed. Now she looked peaceful, almost staged, like a photograph in a frame. I pulled a chair closer and sat down, folding my hands in my lap the way I used to in church. "Hello, Patricia," I said softly, even though Emily had told me not to bother. The words sounded small in the large room. For a long moment nothing happened. The afternoon sun stretched across the hardwood floors in thin golden lines. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires whispering against the pavement. I told myself I was imagining things when I thought I saw the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Could have been a shadow. Could have been my tired eyes. I leaned back and exhaled, reminding myself that I was here to help, not to question. Yet something didn't fit. The care instructions mentioned medication that wasn't on the kitchen counter. The so-called medical equipment didn't look connected to anything substantial. And if she truly couldn't hear or respond, why had Emily been so insistent that I not speak? I reached forward and gently touched Patricia's hand. It felt warm, not slack or distant. "If you can hear me," I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'm Margaret. I'm going to sit with you tonight." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then very slowly, her fingers tightened around mine. It wasn't a reflex. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. My pulse thudded in my ears as I leaned closer, my heart racing in a way it hadn't in years. Her eyelids fluttered once, then again, and with surprising clarity, she opened her eyes and looked directly at me. "Did they leave?" she asked, her voice hoarse but unmistakably aware. In that instant, the story I had been told unraveled, thread by careful thread, and I realized I was no longer just a helpful grandmother filling in for a few nights. I was standing at the edge of something far more complicated, and I had the sinking feeling that Daniel and Emily had counted on me being too old, too polite, or too trusting to notice the truth waiting behind those newly opened eyes. Patricia's fingers remained wrapped around mine as if she feared that if she let go I might disappear like the story they had tried to wrap around her. I did not pull my hand away. I simply looked into her eyes, searching for confusion, for fog, for any sign that what I had just witnessed was a fleeting reflex. There was none. Her gaze was clear, sharp, and far too aware for a woman who had supposedly not responded to voices for 3 months. "Yes," I said quietly. "They left about 5 minutes ago." She exhaled a slow, controlled breath that did not belong to someone trapped in unconscious silence. I felt my heartbeat steady, not because I was calm, but because something inside me shifted into focus. I had spent most of my life smoothing over discomfort, telling myself not to overreact, convincing myself that younger people simply live differently. But this was not a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. I pulled the chair closer and lowered my voice. "How long have you been awake?" I asked. Patricia glanced toward the hallway, as if even the empty air might be listening. "Long enough," she whispered. The afternoon light continued to stretch across the floor, ordinary and indifferent, as if nothing extraordinary had just taken place. I stood slowly and walked to the front window, peeking through the curtain to confirm Daniel's car was truly gone. The street was empty. A delivery truck idled 2 houses down, then rolled away. I returned to her bedside. "They told me you could not hear anything," I said. "They told me you were unresponsive." A faint, almost humorless smile touched her lips. "That is what they need people to believe." Her words settled into the room like dust, quiet but impossible to ignore. I thought about the binder on the kitchen counter, the neatly written medication schedule, the equipment that hummed without purpose. I had worked as a school secretary for 28 years. I might not be a doctor, but I understood paperwork. I understood patterns. And something about this pattern had already begun to itch at the back of my mind. "Why?" I asked. It was the simplest question, and yet it felt heavy. Patricia closed her eyes for a moment, not in weakness but in calculation. "They want control," she said finally. "Of the house. Of the accounts. Of everything." The words were measured, careful. I did not see panic in her face. I saw exhaustion. I sat back down, keeping my voice steady. "Have you seen a physician recently?" I asked. She gave a slight shake of her head. "Only the one Daniel arranged," she said. "And he does not stay long." That detail landed harder than the others. I pictured my son standing in this room, nodding seriously, speaking in that calm tone he used when he wanted to sound responsible. I remembered the way he avoided my eyes earlier, the way he checked his phone as if the room made him uncomfortable. A mother knows the difference between distraction and guilt. I had ignored that difference once before, when he was a teenager lying about a broken window. I would not ignore it again. "Does anyone else know?" I asked. Patricia's fingers tightened again. Weaker this time but still intentional. "No," she said. "They told friends and neighbors that I am not improving. They say I need quiet." I almost laughed at the irony. Quiet was exactly what allowed this arrangement to continue. The house was too orderly, too staged. Even the bed linens were freshly pressed. It looked less like a sick room and more like a performance set. I stood and walked to the kitchen, scanning the counter. The binder contained charts, times, signatures. I noticed that many entries were written in the same ink, the same handwriting, even on days supposedly spaced apart. I had balanced school attendance records for decades. I knew what authentic logs looked like. These were rehearsed. I returned to the living room, holding the binder loosely at my side. "They asked me not to touch anything," I said softly. Patricia's eyes met mine again, and this time there was something like relief in them. "You are not like them," she said. I did not answer right away. I was thinking about Daniel as a little boy, gripping my hand on his first day of kindergarten. I was thinking about the way he used to look at me with trust. Somewhere along the line, that trust had shifted into something colder, more strategic. I set the binder down and leaned closer. "I am not going to confront them tonight," I said evenly. "But I am not going to pretend I did not see what I saw." Patricia nodded once. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows through the bay window. The house no longer felt quiet. It felt watchful. And as I sat there beside a woman who was never truly unconscious, I understood that whatever Daniel and Emily believed about my age, my kindness, or my silence, they had just made their first serious miscalculation. That evening I did exactly what they expected me to do. I moved quietly through the kitchen, prepared a simple dinner, and kept the lights low in the living room as if protecting a fragile patient from disturbance. Patricia rested with her eyes closed whenever headlights passed the window, her breathing slow and even, so convincing that I almost admired her discipline. We did not speak again until the sky outside deepened into a soft navy blue. and the neighborhood settled into nighttime stillness. I checked every lock on the doors, not out of fear but out of habit. I had lived alone for 5 years. Routine had become my comfort. When I returned to her bedside, she opened her eyes without hesitation. "They will call," she said quietly. "They always check in." I nodded. I had already noticed Daniel's pattern of brief, controlled conversations. He would ask practical questions. He would not linger. He would not ask how anyone felt. At precisely 8:43 in the evening, my phone vibrated. His name appeared on the screen. I stepped into the hallway before answering. "How is she?" he asked. His tone was measured, almost rehearsed. "She is resting," I replied calmly. "No changes." There was a pause long enough for me to hear him exhale. "Good," he said. "The nurse will be there in the morning around 9. I made a mental note. "Of course," I answered. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask if I needed anything. After we hung up, I stood in the dim hallway for a moment, staring at the framed family photos lining the wall. Graduation pictures. Wedding portraits. Smiling faces preserved in glass. It struck me how easy it was to curate an image of unity, while something entirely different unfolded behind closed doors. I returned to Patricia. "He called," I said. She gave a slight nod, unsurprised. "He needs witnesses," she murmured. That word lingered in the air. Witnesses. Not caregivers. Not family. Witnesses. I sat down and folded my hands again, letting my thoughts settle into order. "Tell me what they are trying to make you sign," I said gently. Patricia's gaze shifted toward the coffee table where a leather folder rested beneath a stack of magazines. "Power of attorney," she whispered. "Transfer of property management. Temporary," they said. For my own good. I had handled enough school district paperwork to know how flexible the word temporary could become. "Have you signed anything?" I asked. "No," she replied. "I told them I needed time." There was a faint spark of pride in her voice. For a woman portrayed as unresponsive, she had held her ground quietly. I walked to the coffee table and picked up the folder. The documents were neatly clipped, printed on high-quality paper, margins perfectly aligned. Daniel's name appeared repeatedly. So did Emily's. The language was polite, professional, and carefully structured to suggest protection rather than control. I read slowly, my lips pressing into a thin line. "They are moving quickly," I said. Patricia closed her eyes again, as if conserving strength. "They think I am fading," she replied. "They think I will not notice." I felt a familiar steadiness return to me. The same composure I used to rely on when parents came into the school office angry or confused. Panic solved nothing. Observation solved everything. I set the folder back exactly where I had found it, aligning the corners carefully. If they wanted a witness, I would be one. But not in the way they intended. Around 10 o'clock, Patricia shifted slightly and looked at me with a seriousness that made her seem younger. "You do not have to stay," she said. I held her gaze. "Yes," I answered quietly. "I do." Outside, the wind picked up just enough to rustle the leaves in the maple tree by the driveway. The house felt different now. Not staged. Not silent. Alert. I turned off the television that had been playing softly in the background, and allowed the room to settle into darkness except for the lamp near her bed. In the stillness, I began mapping out what I would need. Dates. Names. Copies. If a nurse truly came at 9 in the morning, I intended to ask questions. Not confrontational questions. Just precise ones. For the first time since stepping into that house, I did not feel like a visitor filling space. I felt like someone who had been handed a responsibility far larger than a few overnight shifts. Daniel believed I would sit quietly and report nothing unusual. Emily believed I would follow instructions and avoid looking too closely. They had both underestimated something simple. I had spent 72 years learning how to read a room, and this room was telling me everything. The next morning I woke before sunrise, not because I had slept well, but because my mind had been quietly arranging pieces all night. The house was still wrapped in that pale gray light that comes just before dawn, when everything looks softer than it truly is. Patricia lay with her eyes closed, her breathing steady, performing the role they had assigned to her. I rose from the recliner where I had rested and walked to the kitchen to start coffee. The machine gurgled loudly in the silence, and for a brief moment I wondered if neighbors ever questioned how quiet this house had become. A woman in a supposed coma for months, yet no medical transport vehicles, no steady stream of visiting nurses, no relatives dropping by. Just curated silence. I poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit, then smiled faintly at myself and carried one back to the living room, setting it on the side table. Patricia opened her eyes the moment I sat down. "What time is it?" she asked softly. 6:15, I replied. "The nurse is expected at 9. She absorbed that information without surprise. I noticed the way she conserved her movements, not weak but cautious. "When she comes," Patricia said, "she will speak to you, not to me." That detail sharpened my focus. "Why?" I asked. Patricia's gaze drifted toward the ceiling for a second. "Because she is not here to treat me," she said quietly. "She is here to confirm a story." The words were calm, but they settled heavily in the room. I stood and walked back to the kitchen, this time examining drawers and cabinets with purpose. The refrigerator held neatly labeled containers, dates written in black marker. The medications on the counter were arranged precisely, but several prescription bottles appeared unopened. I picked one up and turned it over in my hand. The seal was intact. I placed it back exactly as I found it. At 8:55, a white sedan pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window without. Stepping outside, a woman in light blue scrubs exited the vehicle, carrying a slim clipboard and a small black bag. She walked with the ease of someone who had done this many times. I opened the door before she rang the bell. "Good morning," she said with a polite smile. "I am here for Patricia Whitmore." "Of course," I replied, stepping aside. "I am Margaret Collins. I am staying with her while her family is away." She nodded and entered, her eyes scanning the room quickly but not thoroughly. I led her to the living room. Patricia lay still, eyes closed. The nurse approached the bed, checked Patricia's pulse with a brief touch to her wrist, and glanced at the monitors that hummed quietly beside the bed. She did not adjust anything. She did not ask Patricia a single question. Instead, she turned to me. "Has there been any change?" she asked. "No," I answered evenly. "She has been resting." The nurse made a note on her clipboard without looking up. "Continue monitoring," she said. "Family has been very attentive." I noticed she did not ask about medication timing. She did not examine the intravenous lines because there were none connected. She did not perform any assessment beyond what could be observed from a distance. It was efficient. Too efficient. "How long have you been overseeing her care?" I asked casually. The nurse paused for a fraction of a second before responding. "Since the incident," she said. "About 3 months." "And has she shown any response at all during that time?" I kept my tone neutral. The nurse offered a small professional smile. "Recovery can be unpredictable," she said. "The family understands that." It was a statement that answered nothing. Within 15 minutes, she closed her clipboard and walked toward the door. "I will return next week," she said. "Please contact the family if anything changes." After she left, the house felt even quieter than before. I waited until the sedan disappeared around the corner before returning to Patricia's side. Her eyes opened immediately. "You see," she murmured. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "I see." The performance had layers. The nurse was not cruel. She was careful. She confirmed presence, not condition. She validated a narrative, not a patient. I sat down and folded my hands once more, feeling the weight of what this truly meant. Daniel had not arranged care for his mother-in-law. He had arranged documentation. Emily had not asked me to help out of desperation. She had asked me to complete a picture. I looked at Patricia with new clarity. "They are building a record," I said quietly. Patricia held my gaze. "And they need you to make it believable." The morning light had grown brighter, illuminating every corner of the room. Nothing was hidden now. Not the unopened medication bottles, not the untouched equipment, not the carefully placed folder on the coffee table. I rose slowly and walked to the hallway mirror, catching my reflection. I did not look shocked. I did not look frightened. I looked awake. And for the first time since stepping into that house, I understood that what they had orchestrated was not a mistake or misunderstanding. It was a strategy. The only question left was how long they believed I would remain part of it. That afternoon the house felt less like a stage and more like a waiting room before a verdict. I did not rush. I did not confront anyone. I made a simple lunch, soup heated slowly on the stove, the scent of chicken broth and thyme filling the kitchen with something almost comforting. Patricia sat propped slightly higher in the adjustable bed now. Her movements careful but no longer disguised. "You should conserve your strength," I told her gently as I carried a small bowl to the side table. She gave me a faint look of amusement. "I have been conserving it for months," she replied. I understood what she meant. Silence can be a form of endurance. After lunch, I returned to the leather folder on the coffee table. I read every page again, this time more slowly. The language was framed as protection, as temporary guardianship in light of diminished capacity. The date fields were blank. Signature lines waited patiently. I imagined Daniel placing a pen in her hand, guiding her fingers while claiming it was for her own good. The thought did not make me angry. It made me precise. I walked to the small desk near the staircase and found a stack of stationery and envelopes. Patricia watched me quietly. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Creating a record," I answered. I began writing down everything I had observed since arriving. The time of the phone call, the nurse's visit, the unopened medication bottles, the absence of medical equipment in use. I wrote with steady handwriting, the same neat script I had used for decades filing school reports. Details matter. Later that evening Daniel called again. This time I answered from the living room so Patricia could hear every word. "Any changes?" he asked. "No changes," I said evenly. "The nurse came this morning. She did not stay long." There was a brief pause. "That is normal," he said quickly. "She just checks vitals." "Of course," I replied. I allowed a beat of silence before adding, "She did not ask many questions." Daniel cleared his throat softly. "Well, she trusts the documentation," he said. "Documentation. That word again." "I see," I answered. I did not accuse. I did not challenge. I simply let the conversation end. When I hung up, Patricia looked at me with something new in her expression. Not fear. Not even worry. It was resolve. "They believe you will not look closely," she said. I sat back in the chair and folded my hands in my lap. "They are mistaken," I replied. The house settled into night once more. But it no longer felt oppressive. It felt strategic. I walked through each room slowly, noting framed certificates on the wall, financial awards Daniel had once admired, photographs of Patricia standing confidently beside her late husband at charity events. This was not a woman who had built a life by accident. She had managed investments, chaired committees, negotiated contracts. And now she was being reduced to silence for convenience. I returned to her bedside. "Do you have access to your own bank accounts?" I asked carefully. Patricia hesitated before answering. "Daniel handles the online accounts now," she said. "He insisted after the stroke." I nodded. "And before that?" "I managed everything," she said. The pattern was clear. Gradual dependence. Controlled information. Curated narrative. I sat quietly for a long moment, then stood and retrieved my phone. "I would like to make one call tomorrow," I said. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly in curiosity. "To whom?" she asked. "To someone who understands paperwork better than they understand performance," I replied. I did not elaborate, but I was already thinking of Harold Green, the attorney who had once handled my husband's estate. He was meticulous and patient. He did not frighten easily. Outside, a porch light flicked on next door, casting a soft glow across the driveway. I felt no rush. This was not a battle of raised voices. It was a matter of sequence. Evidence first. Action second. Patricia shifted slightly and looked at me with quiet gratitude. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. I considered the question honestly. "Because I know what it feels like to be underestimated," I said. "And because no one deserves to be written out of their own life while they are still living it." She closed her eyes again, not in pretense this time but in trust. I turned off the lamp beside her bed and allowed the room to dim, leaving only the hallway light casting a faint outline against the wall. In the quiet, I felt something steady settle inside me. They had arranged a script. They had assigned roles. But they had forgotten one simple truth. I was no longer just a visitor in that house. I was a witness who had begun to write her own record. The next morning I stepped outside just after 7, the cool air carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass from somewhere down the block. I did not leave the driveway. I simply stood there for a moment, looking at the Whitmore house from the street the way a stranger might. It appeared orderly, well-maintained, respectable. No one driving past would imagine that inside, a woman fully aware of her surroundings had been reduced to a narrative of silence. I went back inside and closed the door quietly. Patricia was awake, watching the ceiling with an expression that felt less like fear and more like calculation. "Today," I said softly, "we begin carefully." She turned her head slightly toward me. "What does that mean?" she asked. I sat down beside her and spoke in the same tone I once used with anxious parents in the school office. Calm. Direct. "It means we do not confront them. We document them." After breakfast, I made the call I had been considering since the night before. Harold Green answered on the third ring, his voice steady and familiar. "Margaret, it has been a while," he said warmly. "It has," I replied. "I need advice, not urgency." I outlined the situation without dramatics, focusing only on facts. The alleged coma, the power of attorney documents, the nurse's limited assessment, the unopened prescriptions. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Has Patricia been evaluated independently?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not by anyone without a connection to the family." "Then that is the first step," he replied. "You will need a neutral medical evaluation, and a copy of any existing legal documents filed in her name." I thanked him and ended the call, feeling a quiet reinforcement settle into my spine. I returned to the living room and explained what I had done. Patricia listened without interruption. "They will not expect that," she said finally. "They expect me to accept what I see," I answered. Around noon, Daniel sent a brief text message asking if everything was stable. I responded with a single word. Yes. No elaboration. No emotion. I could almost sense his relief through the silence that followed. That afternoon I searched the house more deliberately, not intrusively, but observantly. In a drawer near the desk, I found older bank statements addressed directly to Patricia, dated 6 months prior. In a separate folder in the cabinet, I located newer statements redirected to Daniel's email address. The transition had been subtle, gradual. I placed everything back exactly where it had been. By late afternoon, Patricia seemed stronger. She sat up with assistance and drank water without difficulty. "You will need to appear unchanged when they return," I told her gently. She nodded. "I understand." Her composure impressed me. There was no panic, only a steady resolve. "Do you regret pretending?" I asked quietly. She considered that question before answering. "At first it felt like survival," she said. "Now it feels like strategy." The distinction mattered. As evening approached, the house grew still again. But this time the silence felt cooperative rather than oppressive. We were no longer reacting. We were preparing. I drafted a list of specific questions to ask the nurse on her next visit, phrased politely but precisely. I also scheduled an appointment with a physician recommended by Harold, someone who could conduct a proper evaluation discreetly. I did not inform Daniel. Not yet. When he called that night, his voice carried a hint of impatience beneath its calm surface. "Still no changes?" he asked. "She remains the same," I replied. The statement was true in a way he would not understand. After the call ended, I sat beside Patricia once more. "They believe this house belongs to their version of events," I said quietly. "It does not." Patricia's eyes softened slightly. "You are very calm," she observed. I allowed myself the smallest smile. "Calm is not weakness," I said. "It is clarity." Outside, the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting long shadows across the living room floor. I watched the light shift and thought about the years I had spent believing that staying quiet preserved peace. I understood now that silence can also protect the wrong people. Daniel and Emily had designed a careful arrangement, one built on assumptions about age, obedience, and trust. They had forgotten something simple. I was not here to fill space. I was here to see clearly. And now that I did, there would be no turning away. The following morning felt different from the others, not because anything dramatic happened, but because everything moved with intention. I woke before Patricia did and stood by the front window, watching the quiet suburban street as if it might offer some warning. A woman across the road walked her golden retriever. A newspaper landed on a driveway with a soft thud. And life continued exactly as it always had. There was something almost comforting in that normalcy. Inside this house, however, the balance had shifted. When Patricia opened her eyes, she did not ask what time it was. She asked, "What is next?" That question told me she was ready. "Today we confirm your independence," I said calmly. Harold had arranged for a physician he trusted to visit discreetly in the afternoon under the pretense of a wellness consultation. No emergency vehicles. No spectacle. Just evaluation. Until then we maintained the performance. Around 10:30 Daniel called again. His voice carried a subtle strain, the kind that comes from maintaining control at a distance. "Everything still stable?" he asked. "Stable," I replied. "She appears the same." The truth can be shaped by perspective. After we ended the call, I helped Patricia adjust her posture so that if anyone entered unexpectedly, she could resume her previous stillness within seconds. She practiced closing her eyes slowly, regulating her breathing. There was something almost theatrical about it, but not dishonest. It was strategic restraint. At 2:15 in the afternoon, a dark blue sedan pulled quietly into the driveway. The physician introduced himself as Dr. Samuel Reed. He carried no large equipment, only a leather bag and a composed expression. "I understand we are evaluating cognitive responsiveness," he said evenly once inside. I nodded. Patricia closed her eyes as he approached, then opened them on cue when he addressed her directly. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you hear me?" he asked. "Yes," she answered clearly. The doctor's gaze shifted toward me briefly, not in surprise but in acknowledgement. He proceeded with a series of questions. Date, location, current events, financial awareness. Patricia responded with precision. She knew the month, the president's name, the approximate value of her property, and the structure of her investments. Her voice grew stronger with each answer. Dr. Reed took notes carefully, his pen moving steadily across the page. When he finished, he closed his notebook and looked at us both. "There is no clinical indication of coma," he said calmly, "nor any cognitive impairment preventing independent decision-making." The words were not loud, but they felt like a door unlocking. After he left, Patricia exhaled deeply, as if releasing months of contained tension. "They will not expect this," she murmured. "No," I agreed. "They will not." That evening Daniel did not call at his usual time. Instead, a message arrived asking if the nurse had visited again. I replied simply that no additional visit had occurred. I did not mention the evaluation. Not yet. Patricia watched me type, her expression steady. "When will you tell them?" she asked. I considered that carefully. "When the documentation is complete," I answered. I had already arranged for Dr. Reed's written assessment to be delivered directly to Harold. Copies would be secured before any confrontation took place. The folder on the coffee table remained where Daniel had left it, the unsigned lines waiting patiently. I looked at it differently now. It was no longer a threat. It was evidence of intention. Later that night, as the house settled into darkness once more, I reflected on the subtlety of what had unfolded. There had been no shouting, no dramatic revelations, no raised voices. Just clarity replacing assumption. Patricia turned her head toward me. "You are very composed," she said quietly. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. "Composure is how I survive," I replied. Outside, the streetlights cast soft pools of yellow onto the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a car door closed and laughter drifted faintly through the night air. Life continued, unaware of the quiet shift that had just occurred within these walls. Daniel and Emily believed they had orchestrated a careful arrangement built on silence and trust. They had not anticipated independent verification. They had not anticipated that the woman they asked to sit quietly would instead observe, document, and confirm. As I turned off the final lamp beside Patricia's bed, I understood something simple and unshakable. Their strategy had depended on invisibility. and invisibility had just ended. Daniel and Emily returned 2 days later, just before sunset, their car rolling into the driveway with the confidence of people who believed nothing had shifted in their absence. I stood at the kitchen counter when I heard the engine cut off, drying my hands slowly on a dish towel as if this were any ordinary visit. Patricia lay in her bed with her eyes closed, her breathing measured, every detail of her posture rehearsed. The front door opened and footsteps crossed the hardwood floor. "How has she been?" Emily asked before she even stepped fully into the living room. Her tone carried concern, but it sounded polished, almost rehearsed. "Stable," I replied evenly, meeting her gaze without hesitation. Daniel walked toward Patricia and leaned slightly over the bed, watching her face for a moment that lasted just a fraction too long. "No improvement?" he asked quietly. "No visible change," I answered. The truth remained shaped by perspective. Emily placed her purse on the coffee table, close to the leather folder that still rested beneath the magazines. "We have some paperwork to review soon," she said casually, glancing at Daniel as if confirming a script. "Just temporary arrangements." I nodded once. "I saw the documents," I said calmly. Neither of them reacted immediately, but I noticed the subtle stiffening in Daniel's shoulders. "We have not had time to finalize anything," he said quickly. "It is just in case." "Of course," I replied. I did not challenge the explanation. I did not need to. Later that evening after dinner, Daniel stepped outside to take a phone call. Emily lingered in the kitchen with me, rinsing dishes that did not need rinsing. "You have been very helpful," she said without looking at me. "We could not manage this without you." I studied her reflection in the darkened window. "Family helps family," I answered. She smiled faintly, but it did not reach her eyes. When Daniel returned, he walked straight to the living room and picked up the leather folder. "We might ask her to sign tomorrow," he said quietly to Emily, assuming I was too far away to hear clearly. "The sooner it is done, the better." Emily nodded. "She would have wanted this handled efficiently," she replied. I stepped into the doorway just then, my expression calm. "Handled efficiently?" I repeated gently. Daniel turned, startled only for a second before regaining composure. "We are just discussing logistics," he said. "Nothing urgent." I walked slowly toward the couch and sat down. "I agree that clarity is important," I said. "Especially when legal authority is involved." The room grew quiet. Patricia remained still, her eyes closed, the performance intact. Daniel cleared his throat. "You do not need to concern yourself with legal details," he said. "We have already consulted professionals." "So have I," I replied softly. The words were not sharp, but they landed. Emily's gaze shifted quickly to Daniel. "What do you mean?" she asked. I folded my hands in my lap. "I mean that an independent evaluation was completed this afternoon," I said evenly. "A licensed physician has assessed Patricia's cognitive state." The silence that followed felt heavier than any raised voice. Daniel's grip tightened slightly on the folder. "That was not necessary," he said. "We are handling her care." "It was necessary," I replied calmly, "because she is fully aware, fully responsive, and fully capable of making her own decisions." Emily's face drained of color, though she tried to maintain composure. "That is not possible," she said quietly. The nurse confirmed presence," I interrupted gently. "Not incapacity." Daniel stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Not as his mother. Not as a placeholder. As an obstacle." "You had no right," he began. "I had every right," I said evenly. "I was asked to be here. I observed. I documented. I verified." At that moment, Patricia opened her eyes. Not slowly. Not uncertainly. Deliberately. She looked directly at Daniel. "I will not be signing anything," she said clearly. The words were calm, but they carried finality. Emily stepped back instinctively, her composure faltering. Daniel's expression shifted from disbelief to calculation. I remained seated, my posture unchanged. "Any further discussions regarding authority or property will go through legal counsel," I added quietly. "Documentation has already been secured." The air in the room felt different now. No longer curated. No longer controlled. The narrative they had built over months unraveled in a matter of seconds, not through confrontation, but through confirmation. Daniel lowered the folder slowly, the confidence he had arrived with dissolving into something far less certain. Outside, the last light of the day faded beyond the windows, leaving the house illuminated only by the lamps we had chosen to turn on. And in that steady glow, the illusion they depended upon simply could not survive. No one spoke for several long seconds after Patricia's words settled into the room. Daniel stood frozen near the coffee table, the leather folder hanging loosely at his side as though it had suddenly become heavier than he expected. Emily's hands tightened around the back of the dining chair, her knuckles pale against the polished wood. I remained seated, my posture steady, my breathing even. I did not need to raise my voice. The truth had already done the work. "This does not change the fact that we were trying to protect you," Daniel said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. Patricia shifted slightly in the bed, her eyes never leaving his face. "Protection does not require deception," she replied calmly. There was no anger in her voice, only clarity. I watched my son carefully. I had seen that look before when he was a boy caught in a lie, the brief flicker between denial and calculation. But this was not a broken window or a missed curfew. This was months of strategy built on silence. "You misunderstood the situation," Emily said quickly, stepping forward as if to regain control of the narrative. "We were managing her affairs because she was not capable." "She is capable," I said quietly, "and an independent physician has confirmed it in writing." I reached into my purse and placed a sealed envelope on the coffee table. I did not slide it toward them. I simply set it there, visible. The weight of paper can be stronger than accusation. Daniel looked at the envelope but did not touch it. "You went behind our backs," he said, the frustration finally surfacing. "No," I replied evenly. "I went beside you. I observed what you asked me to observe." The room felt smaller now, not because of tension but because the illusion of control had collapsed. Patricia slowly pushed herself more upright, her movements steady and deliberate. "I trusted you," she said to Daniel. "I allowed you access to my accounts because I believed you were helping." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We were helping," he insisted. "We were preparing in case things worsened." "Preparing does not require rewriting someone's condition," I answered. My voice remained calm, almost gentle. The power and restraint often unsettles more than anger. Emily stepped closer to the folder still in Daniel's hand. "We can still resolve this privately," she said carefully. "There is no need to involve attorneys." I allowed a small pause before responding. "Attorneys are already involved," I said. "Documentation has been filed. Copies are secured." The silence that followed was different from the earlier shock. This was the silence of recalculation. Daniel set the folder down slowly on the coffee table, next to the envelope I had placed there. "What exactly do you want?" he asked, his voice lower now, stripped of authority. I met his eyes. "I want transparency," I said. "I want her financial access restored immediately. I want all documents reviewed by independent counsel. And I want the narrative corrected." Emily's composure wavered for a fraction of a second. "Corrected how?" she asked. Patricia answered before I could. "By acknowledging that I was never incapacitated," she said firmly, "and that any authority granted under that assumption is invalid." Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its headlights briefly illuminating the living room before fading into darkness. It felt symbolic, a passing moment of exposure. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, something he had not done since he was a teenager under pressure. "This is going to create complications," he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "The complications were already created." I stood then, not abruptly, but with quiet finality. "You asked me to be here," I continued. "You assumed I would sit quietly and confirm what you needed confirmed. Instead, I confirmed what was true." My son looked at me in a way he had not in years, not dismissively, not impatiently, but carefully. "You do not trust us," he said. I held his gaze. "Trust requires honesty," I replied. Patricia reached for the envelope and slid it slightly closer to Daniel without breaking eye contact. "Read it," she said. "Then we will speak again tomorrow with counsel present." There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, Just the quiet unraveling of a plan built on assumption. Emily picked up her purse, her movements slower now. Daniel lifted the envelope, his confidence replaced by uncertainty. As they moved toward the door, I did not follow them. I simply stood beside Patricia's bed, steady and composed. The front door closed with a soft click, not a slam. When the house returned to silence, it felt lighter than it had in weeks. Patricia leaned back against her pillows and exhaled slowly. "You changed everything," she said. I shook my head gently. "No," I replied. "We did. By refusing to disappear." The lamps cast a warm glow across the room, no longer illuminating a stage but a reclaimed space. I sat down once more, folding my hands in my lap, aware that nothing about this had required shouting or spectacle. It required attention. It required documentation. It required the willingness to look closely when others expected blindness. And in that quiet living room, with the illusion finally gone, I understood something simple and enduring. They had mistaken age for silence. They had mistaken kindness for compliance. And they had forgotten that clarity, once awakened, does not return to sleep.